Hello dear audio wizards and fellow music makers. Today we're going to dive deep into limiters. If you're in a hurry, just jump to the end, to the conclusion, and otherwise let me tell you a bit about the journey that led me to making this video and also the whole protocol I used to make it. First thing first, I'm using limiters on a daily basis. I'm using them on my own work and I'm using this for my clients, for all the masters I'm delivering. I use them in my own work on individual tracks, on groups, and on the masters, of course, on the master bus at the end of my chain. Well, I have acquired several limiters through the time. I tested some things along the way. I made some decisions that, oh, this might be working on this case, this on that one. And when I'm mastering tracks, I like to use some of them more than others. But the thing is, I never really went to the core of things. And somehow I started to feel a bit ashamed and to hate myself using those tools every day, but never really taking the time to dive really deep into it. So a few days ago, I decided to do a kind of ultimate shootout of my limiters. I knew it was going to be a rabbit hole. Actually, I spent more than 3 full days testing these limiters and doing A/B comparisons, eyes closed, putting things into plugin doctor. So I will spare you the whole process. I will not play you some audio examples, but I will give you some of my conclusions. And I hope this will help you make some choices, or at least be an eye or an ear opener for further use for yourself. Okay, so first little thing I want to talk about is limiters inside mixing projects, because my main use is to use limiters when I'm using masters, yet we can use limiters into a mixing context. And for that particular use case, there are really like 2 limiters that I highly recommend. The first one is Track Limit from DMG, because it is a limiter that is very, 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 very efficient. It has different mode that makes it very versatile, and it is very light on your CPU. So it's a very handy tool, and I use this a lot, and after my test I still felt it was holding up against very more CPU demanding kind of limiters like ProL, like LimitOne, etc., etc. So that's the first thing. So when I'm limiting a kick drum, when I'm limiting a drum bus, this is my go-to limiter. It was and it will remain like that. This test only affirmed what I was thinking about this very nice tool before, being something that is very unique, very versatile, and very light on CPU. The other one might be very surprising. It's the L2, not ProL, but the L2 from Waves. And the fact is, I like this limiter because it's not a good limiter. Or, I mean, it's limiting properly, but it's not good in the sense that it's eroding the transients. It's not a transparent limiter, but actually this is the exact aspect of it that makes me like it. When I feel that there is a sound that is too harsh, where the transient spoke too much, with very high-end limiters, you can reduce the transient, but still you have this kind of quality on the transient that remains intact. And actually this is something that the L2 from Waves doesn't do. It's eroding the transient. It's kind of rolling off a bit the top end. And when I want just to push something back into the mix, when I feel that there's a sound that's just poking too much out of it, this quality, this kind of dirtiness of L2 from Waves is something that I really enjoy. I love the way the L2 works by just touching the knob in the center and taking down both the input and the output. So you are always level matched and you just listen when is the sound like breaking apart. Is it too much, or is it just like fading away what you wanted to place the sound in a mix? So it's a mixing tool. I'll never use this in mastering. It's been years. I don't use it in mastering anymore for that reason. But as a mixing tool, it's a very handy limiter just to push some things back a little. Okay. Now let's get at the juicy part, the core of this video, comparing what I felt were top limiters. Little disclaimer, of course this video is not sponsored and all the conclusions are mine and only mine and made for my personal use as starting point, and I'm happy to share this with you. So the limiters I tried were A.O.M transparent limiter. Fabfilter ProL2, Ozone Maximizer, LimitOne from Leapwing, DMG Limitless, and Sonible SmartLimit 2. So these were the 6 contenders in this tryout. So let me tell you a bit about the process and how I work things through. As it was very hard as a starting point, because some of them, like Limitless, like ProL, like Maximizer, they have different modes. So actually, instead of comparing 6 limiters, I would be comparing like, I don't know, 15 or 20 or something, because you have like 5 or 6 modes in ProL, in Limited, etc., etc. So this makes the test a lot more complicated to achieve. So what I did was that actually, when I was trying to look for some aspect of the limiter, like for example the punch, I was looking at a given setting, which mode of a particular limiter was working the best. I was putting them all in like the best sounding mode, and I was blind testing them against each other. So I did this for the punch, I did this for the transient details, I did this for the low end reaction, and actually both how much is it keeping the level of the low end, not like tilting the EQ, but also how much or how little was it adding distortion to the low end. And I tried also with the stereo image, because many limiters tend to narrow a bit the stereo image, but they can also change the punch in the center of the image. So I tried both for the width and for the center of the stereo image. I tried for the punch, I compared them for the transient response, I compared them for the low end result, and also this is important to note, I realized that some limiters were working better than others at low gain reductions amount, but then they could fall apart at higher, and the contrary was true as well. So I first started my test by actually squashing the limiters to reveal the character, but then I realized that actually some of them that were working very nice, better than others at very squashed signals, were actually working less good than others at gentle gain reduction amounts. So I tried to compare those two things, listening at high gain reduction to understand what character was it bringing to the sound, the harmonics, the color, the tilt on the tonal balance. And then I also compare them at a more like average working loudness to be working at like -4 decibels of gain reduction. So I did tests at -4, at -6, and at -25 decibel of gain reduction to really compare how these were all holding against each other. And this was a first very interesting and a very revealing aspect of things, because so far, when I was choosing a mode on my limiter, what I was doing is I was always pushing the limiter a lot to find the mode that to my ears was working the best, and then I was throwing back. And it felt like, okay, I'm pushing it to see which mode is working the best on my sound, and I take it back, and I do this with different limiters to compare them. But actually, within one limiter, the test might be good, but when you compare several limiters against each other, this test actually falls apart. This is why it took me a long time, because instead of doing one test, I did run 3 tests. I tested everything at 3 different levels of gain reduction. Let me take my notes, because there is a lot to say. So first limiter I'm going to talk about is actually this A.O.M transparent limiter. Why? Because for most of my tests it did fall apart. But this tool has something peculiar. It's adding some coloration, it's adding some saturation that is nice, that is sounding very great, and that is pushing sound more into your face. So my conclusion is that actually, usually for my own work, working on a vast variety of clients, it's something that I don't want, because I try to find options that are the most transparent, and I bring color with some other things. But for some heavy distorted bass music or EDM or this kind of sonic material, it has a kind of vibe that is beautiful, and if you're not pushing it too much, it brings everything more to life. if I'm thinking about stereo image, it does also something weird by actually narrowing the really like off-phase signals, but somehow widening a bit the things that are properly like centered. If you are thinking about stereo image, you have like the 60 degrees, which is the proper stereo, the clean stereo, something is panned totally left or totally right. Then you have the out of phase signals that goes like up to 180 degrees, giving you this feel of total openness. Well, it was reducing that 180 degrees, but it was opening that 60 degrees, giving the feeling that you were entering more into the sound. The transients were a bit smashed, but at the same time, you had some crispiness that came out. The low end was a bit reduced, but the saturation was actually beefing it up. So I think this is a very nice tool, but it's not transparent at all. So the name is wrong. I don't think I'm going to use this for my own personal work, but I can totally feel that in a certain genre of music, like dubstep, like EDM, it is very useful. It has this kind of OTT vibe. It's not, of course, it's not multiband, but you have this kind of in-your-face sound. So I will leave this one aside for the rest of my comparisons, because as I said, for me, it didn't stand the high quality transparency that I'm looking for and that I feel a proper mastering limiter should have, but yet it's a very interesting tool to have in your toolbox if you are making this kind of music. Okay, so let's start this review with the stereo width. The one that was respecting the best, the original stereo image, and when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about everything happening also out of phase, like the 180 degrees opening, was Leapwing LimitOne. That was the best one. Please note that for that test, I used a linked stereo mode, not unlinking, because if you are unlinking the channels, of course you are affecting the stereo width. So for that purpose, I did this with a stereo linked mode. Okay, so the best one, LimitOne from Leapwing Audio. Just after that one, DMG Limitless. Just after that one, Sonible SmartLimit 2. After that one, Ozone Maximizer. That was very close to ProL2. To be honest, all those limiters were not really affecting the information that was at like 60 degrees, but more like 180. It was like recentering that ultra wide things. If you were panning something really to the left or to the right, a mono signal to the left or to the right, you would barely feel it moving, but it's the out of phase information that felt a bit more centered. Then I did the same test, but by paying attention to the center image and how defined remains the center. If you are something really in mono in your signal, how much does it feel like still in the center, or maybe might it open up a little bit? The most defined for that one, that kept also the most of punch, was still LimitOne from Leapwing Audio. The one that was following that one was actually Maximizer from Ozone 11. Followed just after that one was the Limitless from DMG. 50-50, it's the same as ProL2. So ProL2 and DMG Limitless felt the same in respect of the center image. With the SmartLimit from Sonible, I felt the image was a bit weaker. It lacked a bit of definition. Let's make a top 3 of these. So LimitOne, Maximizer, and then Limitless from DMG. This is my top 3. Let's now see how these limiters were holding against really like uber squashed signals. Really like, as I said, I think it was more than 25 decibels of gain reduction. It's just nonsense, but just for the sake of things. The best so far for me, Sonible SmartLimit. The only problem is it was very clean, but it lost presence and it lost subs. Like the limiter is compensating things in the background and changing the whole signal to avoid harmonics. It's changing the signal. So the second one that was just below that was the DMG Limitless. But it was very clean. But because this is a multiband, actually what's happening, I guess, it was compressing a lot the lows, because I did this test on most electronic music with a lot of low end. And so what I felt was a kind of tilt in my tonal balance. removing the lows and pushing the highs, it became super bright. So it was clean, but it became super bright. So this is something interesting to keep in mind when using the limitless. It's because of that multi-band action. Of course, you could go in detail and tweak every band. I'm not talking about that. It's super clean, but you need to adjust things. Otherwise, you will change your tonal balance if you are pushing things a lot into that limiter. Otherwise, you can see it as a tool to flatten your tonal balance somehow. This being said, both ProL and Maximizer from Ozone were kind of similar. And in this case, I tried the ProL2 in the bus mode against IRC2 and IRC3 pump in the Maximizer. IRC2 and IRC3 pump mode in Ozone Maximizer felt kind of the same against those squashed signals, and they were the one holding the best, and this was the same for ProL2 in the bus mode. So the bus algorithm was bearing better those high level signals. Okay, now about normal use, around 3.5-4 decibels of gain reduction. This is already hot, very hot for end limiter. I wouldn't push mine so far, but let's say to be able to reveal the most of the character of the limiter, I was like, this is the maximum acceptable in a case of a mastering situation. Well, funnily enough was that actually all 5 limiters behave kind of similar, except from limitless in terms of tonal balance. They all preserved the subs in a similar way, but limitless had a quieter sub again because of that multiband action. So what I heard was squashing them in the aspect of tonal balance. I'm not talking about harmonic distortion. I'm not talking about transients. Just about tonal balance actually was the same. Smart Limiter, ProL2, Ozone Maximizer, LimitOne had the same tonal balance preservation. Just DMG Limitless had a bit of weaker low end because of that multiband action. Let's talk now about the same, but in a very hard use. I just push things further up to 6 decibel of gain reduction. Here, things tend to be a bit more different. The differences are a bit more pronounced. Again, I tested different modes, but the one that were working the best for ProL2 and Ozone Maximizer, they had exactly the same low end, and LimitOne from Leapwing Audio as well. What I realized is, as I said before, Limitless had a quieter low end, and Sonible SmartLimit had also the same low end in terms of tonal balance. But what did change was that Sonible SmartLimit, Fabfilter ProL2 and Ozone Maximizer felt having the same total harmonic distortion. But in this case, LimitOne from Leapwing Audio felt having a little quieter harmonic distortion. So to my ears, felt a little better. It was a bit less distorting the signal. And Limitless from DMG felt having a little bit more total harmonic distortion. I'm not sure, was it really harmonic distortion or was it the tilt on the low-end energy that made it feel like it was brighter and harsher? But all things considered, I preferred LimitOne from Leapwing Audio in this use case. Talking about punch now. To hear really the punch, again, I pushed things a little bit. ProL2 and Maximizer from Ozone felt having something quite similar. I would say that I could get, changing the modes, but I could get a little more punch with ProL2 than with Maximizer. We'll talk about different modes in a second. And Leapwing Audio LimitOne was just below the Maximizer. So that I would say ProL2, Maximizer, LimitOne. While pushing things up to 6 decibel of gain reduction in terms of punch, I had something weird happening with Limitless from DMG. Which is, I had a feeling, and maybe this was my brain tricking me, but again, remember, this was all done blind tested. So actually, I didn't know what limiter I was listening until the end, because I was shifting the order every time, and I was listening with my eyes closed, shifting from one plugin to another. My feeling was with DMG Limitless that the sound was a bit dissociated. It was lacking of togetherness, nearly like I could hear some pre-ringing. I know there's no really pre-ringing, but you know the feeling you have on a transient when you have linear phase filters where there's this kind of whoop and it's lacking the tightness. Well, this is what was happening with limitless. While pushed at 6 decibel of gain reduction compared to the others, we are talking about mini details here, right? But this is where things matter. I felt the snappiness and the tightness, the togetherness of the sound was falling a bit apart. It was less in your face, it was less consistent as a whole than with the other ones. And what I have had as a feeling with the smart limiter from Sonible SmartLimit 2 was a feeling a bit of more distance. It was a bit less in your face than the other ones. The other ones were like more in your face, and this one was being pushed a bit more like it was a bit further away. If you want to dive a little bit into the different modes, I'll not start comparing all the different modes between Maximizer and ProL2. As I said, I just tried for every use case to find the mode that was working the best, and then I compared them each against each other to see which one was holding best in one case scenario, right? But more or less what I felt while pushing this at this level and paying attention to the punch was that depending on the modes, you had more punch or less punch, you had more low end or more harmonic distortion. This is something that was really making the difference. It's not in the stereo width, it's not in the really overall tonal balance, but just the low end. The low end, because it's music with a lot of low end, could feel a bit like fading away, a bit reduced or a bit more distorted depending on the modes. So talking about low end, of course I had to do a low end bass test, right? And so I did this at different levels, again at 10 decibel of gain reduction. And in that case, so for ProL2, in this case scenario, the one that was keeping the bass the more clean was the modern mode. But weirdly enough, it was reducing the level. It was feeling quieter. And for really like sustained low-end signals, Maximizer from Ozone with the IRC3 balanced option was very nice. And on DMG Limitless, the ones that were sounding the best was the mode Smooth and the mode Transparent, with a special mention for the transparent mode that felt more open. The highs were a bit more defined, more open, more close to you. Maximizer and LimitOne from Leapwing Audio had the kind of same low-end reaction. Limitless, as I said, felt a bit more open, but also with a kind of little tilt. Again, less distortion on the lows, but less loudness on the lows. And SmartLimit from Sonible was here, for me, really the one standing out, because it was as clean as ProL and Ozone Maximizer, but even a little more. Then, when I was paying attention in this case scenario on the perceived loudness, because there's the distortion, but also the perceived loudness, Maximizer and Leapwing Audio had the same kind of loudness, while actually SmartLimit from Sonible, that was the cleanest, felt quieter. It felt a bit further away. And Limitless from DMG felt even further away. So for my case, trying at 10 decibels of gain reduction and at 4 decibels of gain reduction, the two winners in this case scenario were Leapwing Audio LimitOne and Sonible SmartLimit. Then I did the same test, paying attention to the transients, and actually at 4 decibel of gain reduction, I had the same ones standing out. So the transient respect was a little better for Leapwing Audio LimitOne and for Sonible SmartLimit 2. And just after this one, we had DMG Limitless. It felt as clean, but again a bit more on the back. Now, last thing was really the respect on the transients, the way they were handling high peak content while preserving the whole quality, the detail on the transients. For me, Maximizer from Ozone, Leapwing LimitOne, and DMG Limitless felt kinda in the same ballpark. ProL2 was just below. It was very nice, but just below. And actually, SmartLimit from Sonible was the same. It stayed clean. It didn't make the transients become trashy, but it was reducing a bit the detail. It was pushing them a bit more to the back. Also know that for the moment, so far for my whole test, SmartLimit from Sonible was used in normal mode. I didn't use any spectral limiting, I didn't use any tilt, I didn't use any soft or hard clipping. This was all flat and not any learned features turned on. So what conclusion should we take out of this? Well, there are a few ones. First is there is not one limiter that is suiting every case scenario, and actually having a few different ones for different use cases might be handy. The things that are playing a big role in my analysis here is how much gain reduction are you after, and how much loudness do you need to gain? That's one aspect. How much low end is there in your track and how sustained is the low end? Because if you have very punchy kicks, you might maybe get away with a bit more distortion, while if you have very long sustained sub basses, you can't. And how far is the stereo image very, very important or not? And maybe you can reduce some with your limiter that you had pushed further away with some other MS EQing or exciters or whatever process you have in the mastering chain. How does a limiter work in the context? And maybe it can take some things out of your signal that actually could be pushed by other things. For example, so far what happened to me is when I felt, and this was something that I did in an empirical way, when I felt that my limiter, because I was mostly using ProL2, was crashing, I had this natural reaction to look for limitless from DMG to put it before, to actually take control a bit of that excessive low end. And so limitless was working as a kind of EQ that was allowing me to push things further in ProL2, or I was using SmartLimit from Sonible before ProL2 as a final limiter as well. And so this kind of a bit more faded away, or a bit like less present in the lows control before getting in the final limiter was a combo that was kind of working and that I might continue to use. What I realize is that in most of my cases, I use limiters with not more than 4 decibels of gain reduction, and in this case scenario, in terms of stereo width, in terms of transients, in terms of low end for the music that I'm making, LimitOne from Leapwing Audio was standing out. So this is a big eye-opener, and here again, I use LimitOne with no clipping. I use the classical, traditional limiting mode. You can then start to play around with clipping to add some flavor, to add some texture. So once I finished my whole test, I realized that actually I forgot one contender in my list, which is a tool that I usually don't use as a limiter, but just for the clipping or for the transient enhancement, which is Newfangled Elevate. So what I did is actually just run a new batch of tests with this one included, and my conclusions are that basically when it comes to stereo width, it's a bit below Leapwing Audio LimitOne, but it's like the DMG Limitless on the width control, and on the mono consistency it's more like ProL2. When it comes to the punch, remaining the quality of the thickness, the punch, it's very nice. This is like Ozone Maximizer, so this is a very good point. And when it comes to the low end saturation, here the adaptative gain is playing a big role. Without adaptative gain, it's not that good. With the adaptative gain, it's close to the maximizer, and of course it's sounding better without true peak action, because true peak action is making it work a little bit more. And for the transients, it's in fact not the best in keeping those transients, but it has this very nice feature of transient enhancement, which can be very handy, and it's something that I like to use to add punch. But by default, if you're not using that feature, if you're just using it like the flat limiting action, I'm not talking about the clipping, etc., I would say it's not the best limiter, and it might be actually some empirical reason why in my chain it didn't make it as a limiter. Big surprise, I heard many people talk about Isotope Maximizer, and it's a limiter that I never use. I use Ozone a lot, but I never used the Maximizer. I felt it was not working that well. This might have been a kind of magic thinking, or I don't know, you know. Also interesting to note that in Isotope Ozone Maximizer, the IRC1 mode, which was the first one, is still sounding very great in some situations. So, the IRC1 is something that I really enjoyed in many cases, the IRC3 punch and the IRC3 balanced. Funnily enough, the modern mode, not so much. It's adding a lot of harmonics, but then again, if you're making music, if you're mastering music that also has not so much low end and that is also very, very forward and already distorted, you might get away. For example, maybe on hard rock, heavy metal, or things like that, you could get away because there's not that much of sustained low end. So here again, you should try your limiters with different modes to really find which one suits the best the music you are making. What I know for sure is that none of these are producing good results when pushed above 6 decibel of gain reduction. So this is a golden rule that I already had for myself, but keep it for you as well. Never try to achieve like 6 decibel of gain reduction with one limiter. It's not working. And below 4 decibel of gain reduction, actually the tonal balance and the punch were pretty similar between all of them. So if you already have one of those, and that you know that you can make your mastering chain without squashing things, well, stop worrying. I spent 3 days maybe for nothing. Maybe not for nothing, but maybe for nothing. Because they are all holding against each other in a very nice way. And if you need some more texture, if you need some more punch, you can also add a little saturation before. You can also add another compressor that will give you that punch before. So long story short, all those tools, when used in a normal range, they are all working incredibly well. Except this A.O.M transparent limiter, which isn't transparent, but is a very handy tool to beef things up. So maybe actually using that on a drum bus inside a mixing project could be a very, very strong tool instead of using just a clipper or a limiter. So here is a little table I made for myself as a recap that is actually summarizing everything we spoke about so far. As you can see, there are measurements about the stereo width, the center image clarity, the tonal balance, how clean are the lows remaining, how do I feel it about the punch, what is the reaction on the transients, what is the total harmonic distortion measured inside plugin Doctor, and this is measured at 4 decibels of gain reduction, the total harmonic distortion measured in plugin Doctor at 6 decibels of gain reduction, something that is more human, which is my feel, and the favorite modes by ear. So these are all the different tests made so far. You see it for limitless, LimitOne, TDR, Elevate, SmartLimit, ProL2, and the Ozone Maximizer every time with all the different modes written down. And so I put in yellow and in green my favorite modes linked to both what I felt by ear and what I measured with plugin Doctor. Totally down below, we see also by category, which was the one that I felt was working best. So we can see that for the total harmonic distortion, well, the best ones working, the different modes that were working the best were the smooth and the transparent mode from Limitless, the multi-B mode from Tokyo, the TDR, and nothing on Elevate, so no adaptive gain, no adaptive release, and very short release time. ProL2 favorite modes were aggressive and modern. As I said, you can see that the sound is overall open and punchy. And so what I tried to do is to match both the favorite modes by ear and the ones that were working the best measured in plugin Doctor. And so this is what is bringing the IRC3 as favorite on Ozone Maximizer, but is bringing the bus. Oh, yeah, this should be green as well, like that. The bus mode on ProL2, modern and aggressive one. So yeah, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. This is the conclusion. I really like, as you see, LimitOne. It's coming on stereo width and stereo center. It is also clean on the lows, but it is lacking a bit of punch and it is adding a little bit more of harmonic distortion. Yet it hits in the chest, it feels clean, and it preserves low end even at high gain reduction, while other limiters like SmartLimit, for example, is the most transparent from the list. It's very clean. It has also this balance control and soft clipper, which is a nice additional feature. It can have a bit more punch than the Maximizer. It feels a lot cleaner than it, but it loses some presence and some subs when you have very low material with a lot of low end. The worst on that aspect would be Elevate from Newfangled. Yet it's clean, but subjectively it was something that was less convincing. On my big surprise, I thought that TDR would be a big contender because I love Tokyo and they're doing amazing job usually, but I felt it wasn't so fine compared to the other ones. It was a bit muddy. It was lacking of definition. The worst was for the transient LimitOne. So here it starts to become interesting. You see, it was my favorite overall, but for something that has a lot of transients that is very spiky, I wouldn't choose a LimitOne. While a limitless actually allowed me to get some very clean results when getting some higher gain reductions, but was eroding a bit more the transients. It was clean, you see it there, it's clean on the lows, but not as punchy. And so the long story, after this long story, the conclusion of this long story is that in fact there isn't one limiter fitting for everything. It's really depending on a lot of different aspects, being how much low end do you have in your music, how much transients do you have in your music, how much gain reduction are you looking to achieve, and below 2 decibel of gain reduction, I could say they were all really similar. So if you are really tackling a little bit of gain reduction, don't bother so much. You already have probably tools that work very fine. But if you need to push things further, then it starts to be interesting to look at what tool is working better and what is the desired result. Is the stereo image that important or not? Because, well, yeah, LimitOne came first on the stereo width and really was like outstanding compared to the other ones in the respect of the stereo image. This being said, well, we can also push the stereo width with other tools. It might sound silly to say like you push it to reduce it afterwards, but yet it's possible. And so if you compare a track where maybe you used some mid-side EQ, where you use some stereo wideners like Ozone Imager to widen things up, and then the final limiter is reducing it a little bit, well, yeah, okay, you are working in a counterproductive way, yet the overall result could end up sounding larger than the original without those expanders. So I would say the only really downer was the transparent limit, which I even didn't put in this list because it had no sense to me. And as I said earlier in the video, as much as limitless is probably one of the cleanest on the market and is allowing you to get high levels of gain reduction, it is also a bit eroding the transients and changing the tonal balance. So it might not be your best choice if you have spiky signals and if you want to achieve high levels of gain reduction without altering the balance. Of course, this was made with flat settings. So here again, because Limitless is a multiband, you could actually push the bands where the sound is fading away and you can compensate for it. So it might sound silly to say it like that, but there is no one way to work around. And even plugins that have maybe some downsides on some aspects like Limitless, well, their own architecture can make up for that. So try things out is my go-to way. I think what I felt instinctively to use maybe LimitOne on smaller amounts of gain reduction, and when I wanted really to preserve punch and image, well, makes sense. If I'm after something punchy, then I might still go for LimitOne. If I want higher levels of gain reduction with heavy low end, I might go for SmartLimit. And for an overall average work, ProL2 and Ozone Maximizer are both very nice contenders, while ProL2 allows you to have a quieter amount of harmonic distortion than the Maximizer from Ozone. It has punch. So here you go. Take some screenshots from this list. You can study it, try it out. I would say maybe the rule of thumb is, in fact, well, have maybe 2 or 3 from this list, and depending on the music you are mastering, choose one that would work the best, or even maybe using combos, like for example, putting a bit of Limitless before to tame some low end that might be a bit too present, and then you can push things further into LimitOne, for example. These are things that could work using different characteristics from every, using the best of both tools to achieve the desired result. Okay, so what's my conclusion here? As I'm working mostly in electronic music, I have music that has a lot of low-end material. And so if I want to preserve that with not that much of added harmonic distortion, that I know that my chain before my limiter and the mixes sent to me allow me to work that last limiter within that 2 to maximum 4 decibel of gain reduction range. And if I want to preserve the most integrity on my stereo image, then I would go for Leapwing LimitOne. This would be like my go-to limiter from now on. If not, then things are a lot more tricky, because Maximizer from Ozone works very nicely shifting between those modes to preserve punch, to preserve clarity. If I have too much low end, usually this should be done with EQing, but if I have too much low end, I might go then maybe for Limitless from DMG or for SmartLimit from Sonible, depending on how upfront and how dense do I need my master to be and how much do I want to be able to tweak things. I would say the only thing that I took out from that, as much as Fabfilter is an amazing limiter, I've used it a lot for low-end material with lots of subs and with kind of heavy gain reduction. It might not be the strongest against the others, and for sure the transparent limiter from A.O.M isn't the one I'm gonna use.